Welcome, everyone. This is ALT EFF Asks, the very first edition. Now, why ALT EFF Asks and what is the idea behind this? Is that this team at ALT EFF, all of us here, we watch a lot of films, we watch a lot of documentaries and a lot of fiction films, and we engage with environmental and climate issues constantly through the year. But it often leaves us with burning questions. So we wanted to take this opportunity to speak with an expert. Here we've got with us Kanchi Kohli, who can help demystify some of these questions. Kanchi Kohli is a researcher, an educator, and a writer on environmental law and policy in India, focusing on governance, sustainability, and justice. She has co-authored books, research papers, and public resources on environmental regulations and commons protection. She's spent years breaking down environmental laws, tracking court cases, and figuring out where the system works and where it totally does not. So we're throwing all our burning questions your way, Kanchi, and hoping for some sort of resolution or, well, maybe even more questions to come out of it.
I'm Kanchi. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for being generous enough to have these conversations with me. I enjoy it.
Yeah, and we all recently watched this film called Duty of Care, which is about a Dutch lawyer, Roger Cox, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He initiated this very groundbreaking climate trial against the Dutch government and against Shell, which is the oil and gas giant. And it left us kind of curious as to whether this can actually be replicated in India and whether we have the same kind of rights.
So when I was watching the film, there was this one line that really stuck with me where Roger Cox, the lawyer, says that the law can save us now. But in India, how much is that actually true, or how much is that actually possible? Does the law really save us? And can I just wake up tomorrow, file a case against the government or a big corporation and expect justice?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to the question here. I think one is about, can the law save us? Or, I'm kind of reframing what Roger Cox would have said. The law can save us, but the question to ask also is, can the law save us now? Or should the law save us now? The other is the Indian context with this whole situation. So I think it's first important for us to even understand the nature of law. And I think for all there is a lot of discussion on this when people are studying law or practicing law, and there is a manner in which they deal with courts or other legal institutions dealing with law. But law, as in principle, is also an instrument. It's an instrument which can be used for oppression or empowerment. It's a the outcomes can be good, bad, unjust, just, depending on all the material factors that come together. So anything that we are putting a faith in completely, then that becomes a question for us to be able to deal with. So in some senses, when you apply this to a country context, or you apply this to a thematic context, whether it's climate change or it's biodiversity or it's human rights or anything like that, it's really understanding the limits of the law. And actually there are some fantastic films also that bring out the conversations about is how much can you it's the people who are arguing for a certain cause, or people who are arguing against a certain cause, and people who are adjudicating over it, people who are actually debating about it in parliament or debating about it on the streets. A lot of it depends on the context in which they're coming from. Now, law and regulations can give you some sort of frameworks. They can give you some sort of guiding kind of principles. Those guiding principles can be pro socially just and environmentally just outcomes, or it can be against it in its design itself. But a lot of it is interpretation. A lot of it is my own bias by which I'm really coming into that situation. It really is driven by geopolitical context, which we are seeing globally right now. So it's not really an affirmative thing. Only the law can save us. So I would frame that question differently. And India, I think, is a subset of what is happening in the world. And I think the complexity for countries like India is that every issue that you touch is embedded so much in historical contexts, as well as current geopolitical positioning of the country. And I think all the developmental aspiration, environmental aspirations, social welfare aspirations that whether it's governments or other expert actors are bringing on in the situation. So I think those are it's a mixed bag kind of long drawn out answer to your question.
That sounds really complicated. It just means that it can go either way,
Yeah.
and you have to take it on a case by case basis.
Also context by context. I think who are, I mean, it's how I frame the legal problem is, and how I'm asking the courts to actually, or any other legal system to actually interpret my problem, or what kind of what is my ask out of this, so all these play out in the legal context in any situation, and it gets complex. So for instance, very simply, if I say this land needs to be converted into a forest because it's very critical for addressing climate change. Now, am I seeing the fact that that land is being used by a poor settlement in urban areas, or is the land being used by pastoral communities? For me, my narrow vision is about plantations and its response to climate change, and maybe the law actually allows it. But this is the journey that we talk about, from using the legal system to deliver justice or deliver complex outcomes rather than just a legal compliance that the law may allow. So I think that sort of intent behind this whole process is very critical if we want socially and environmentally just outcomes of the legal system, if at all.
Given the context that we are a developing country, where do you think the line gets drawn in terms of law? Because even though clean and healthy environment is a right, we also have to chase economic growth.
Every country is, and including India, does in its framing, or any government, no government will say that we are going to leave out this or that. It's where we strike the balance with this whole thing. And I think this is because there are domestic imperatives for this, and there are international imperatives for this. So we have made commitments. There are trade commitments. There are foreign policy commitments. There are environmental commitments. There are human rights commitments. All of which are actually any country has to balance out. Now, how much is social welfare or health or environmental questions embedded into the economic policy? Are they embedded in economic policy, or economic policy embedded in these imbalances? So what takes priority? If it's very clear that certain economic aspirations have to be met despite everything else, then the compromise will lie at the level of either health outcomes or climate outcomes or social welfare outcomes. If it's the other way around, that we need to actually protect socio-ecological ecosystems, then we may actually frame our developmental and economic aspirations differently. And this has been a tussle for the longest. I think for any country, it's been the longest. And I think this is what, in some senses, led was the driving kind of discussions when the world opened up for liberalization, including India, in early 90s. And now what we are seeing is, in some senses, almost a tail end of that process, where lots of countries are starting to look inwards, even in the climate discourse or any legal discourse. You're talking about every country unto themselves. Where is the greater common good, the globe, etc.? That's because it hasn't worked out very neatly, right? So, like for India, constantly is talking about common but differentiated responsibility. Now, that common but differentiated responsibility is an interesting position, an important position to hold for historic emitters outside the country, and we definitely need legal systems or policy systems that respect that. Does the same principle actually apply within the country? So you actually have a global south and a global north within India, or a south and the north, whatever framing that we want to do it. There is high levels of consumption even within the country. Do we actually use those principles to draw up laws and policies, or legal decisions, or legal frameworks to recognize and address those things? then your economic outcomes will look different. Your real estate projects will look different. The sites in which you are actually setting up infrastructure projects will look different. The processes by which you are actually designing any policy solution will look different, because you are going to be making it more democratic, you know, and it may be much more geographic specific. It's like, it's all the big words that we use, right? Leave no one behind. If your intent is clearly defined, then law is a tool to deliver that intent. And in some senses, you know, when people, whether it's the film that you're talking about, when people are actually taking you know, governments to court, it is as much about drafting laws as it is about nudging governments on intent. So you set an intent and then set up processes by which legal systems can deliver much more than just emissions reduction or something else. We need much more intersectional solutions out there now.
If you're talking about intent, so is it then just becomes a function of the government in power and what their intention is and what their priorities are? And so when all of the systems that and all of the policies and all of the frameworks that are being put forward are kind of with that intent, and in let's say it is primarily focusing on economic development and, you know, infrastructure development and so on, there becomes really a small amount of recourse that then one can have to kind of push back on that, because it's not been set up to prioritize anything else but that singular intent, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, to some extent, but I think I mean, at the end result of what you're saying is very much that. But I think in any democracy, the constitution lays out mechanisms by which government's intent can be influenced. So all conditions being conducive, democratic systems, whether it's the parliament, whether it is processes out of which the executive lays out, whether it is the judiciary, or the media for that matter, all the pillars of democracy that we talk about are supposed to actually be able to, all conditions being allowing for that, be able to influence that intent. And I think no government can actually operate in isolation of those pillars as well. So I think that kind of feedback loop, that kind of pushback. So for instance, parliamentary debates on some of these you know, when we think of law, we automatically go to courts, but we forget that law actually plays out so much outside courts. This can be influenced at the level of local level bureaucracies. This can be spoken about. Governments can be influenced through you know, national and state level parliaments. It can be you know, there are community level institutions that both are part of the constitutional system as well as customary systems that can be used to or that where these debates can happen, and where the intent then gets built through that, because governments respond to people. Of course, it's a much deeper question about how much we can actually you know, work with democracy or democratic you know, frameworks at this point of time. But principally, I think if we chip away at various levers that can actually influence governments, whether in India or outside, at some point of time that shift happens. And I think it's a game of patience, not a Game of Thrones always.
So to kind of ground that, I was wondering if you could give us a bird's eye view of the way in which governmental or legal intent has been shifting over the years in India.
There are constitutional mechanisms, institutions that are supposed to deliver certain outcomes, or actually be the proponents of processes. So, for instance, you have to, when you talk about decentralization, there is a system by which decision making needs to take place. So, you actually build from the Gram Sabhas, the village assemblies, and then move up the thing. The parliamentary system is actually supposed to respond to those kinds of mechanisms. Our legal systems were actually also designed to say, okay, you have a hierarchy of courts, you have a hierarchy of institutions that are responsible for certain outcomes, or deliver certain schemes, etc. Over a period of time, I think in most parts of the world, and including in India, there is a sense of hyper centralization that is taking place. There is an overall statement or an order that this needs to happen, and then the grassroots systems then, whether it's the government machinery or the community machinery or citizens, are responding to that. So in some senses, what I'm saying is all of us are then participants or recipients of a process, and we are not really co-decision makers or co-travelers in the whole thing. So you would say, okay, India's ambition for solar is XYZ, or India's the decision to actually retain certain fossil fuel percentage in our economy is this much, or for all of it we will do emissions reduction either through this kind of agriculture or that kind of plantations. Right now appear to be much more centralized. That's why you also see pushback from certain states. You also see, sometimes it's also difficult to implement that intent. Because when it plays out, doesn't play out in empty spaces. It's playing out in places where there are different kinds of mechanisms that are taking place. So you see that there is a pushback on certain kind of renewable energy projects. People are talking about, okay, why weren't we taken in why were these processes not participatory enough or consent driven enough, and why is this converted into a blue flag beach where fishing is not allowed? We've been doing traditional fishing there. So I think these are complexities, I think, which are, I think our constitution allows for a lot of it, because allows to actually address a lot of these things, because all jurisdictions are state, central, and concurrent, and it allows for that federal distribution of powers by which decentralized processes can work. But in whether it's the climate discourse or the economic discourse, processes have been one of the biggest compromise, by which you arrive at decisions. And it doesn't the decisions can actually tilt either which way. They will be. It depends on what people want. It may not really work with my ethic or your ethic or whatever. But where are those processes? And I think those processes are critical in any democratic context. And to deliver outcomes, for people to feel that I have been part of this process. This is not. I may actually choose exactly what the government wants me to do, but are the conditions conducive for fair, equitable, free, open thinking, by which I have, people who are recipients of a certain decision are also party to having that informed decision making.
I think that was really awesome, really insightful, some really good nuggets in there.